The RTX 5070 is going to perform the same as a 5090, even though the specs have no right being there. And this is all according to Jensen.
Impossible without artificial intelligence.
Oh, so this is not really performance. So this isn't gonna be like when they introduced the RTX 3070. That was like, oh, it's gonna be about the same performance as a 2080 Ti and coming in at a much cheaper price. This is probably one of the saddest things that we've seen. So instead of, pushing raw performance on GPUs, DLSS 4 with multi-frame gen, 15 out of 16 pixels, so 1 in 16 pixels are computed by your GPU. The rest are done by AI. That's not an exciting thing for me. That makes me seem like, oh, this is gonna feel like shit. This is gonna look like shit. Maybe it won't. At the end of the day, if it does feel and look good, then it doesn't really matter a ton, but I don't think this is really a very good direction here. First off, they have introduced DLSS 4. And with DLSS 4, a ton of stuff is being improved. There's multi-frame gen 1, so they're adding a completely new feature. They're actually improving the upscaling and the ray reconstruction by going to a entirely different AI model. And then they also improved the frame generation, because DLSS already had frame generation before, Reflex 2. I'm going to talk about this in this video, even though it's not really DLSS, but it might aid in DLSS, so I want to make sure we touch on that. Nvidia is introducing more neural rendering techniques. They're doing things like texture and model compression, as Nvidia loves to not give us enough VRAM for anything. That would be too kind of them. So instead they're gonna make an AI model in order to compress textures instead of just giving us more VRAM. Probably is still a good technology, but they're also introducing neural faces in games, which this one weirds me out, because I'm not gonna lie, they don't look quite right. It's still hitting that uncanny valley. I'm just show you these side by side. They don't. It's weird. Features that we're seeing, like with multi-frame generation, this is only gonna be available on RTX 50 cards. And you know that's why Nvidia is able to claim these, because like, oh, it just conveniently is exclusive to only their new generation. How does it happen? How does it happen every time, It just is what it is. The new generation is so good. 50 series will have everything. 40 series has the base frame generation. 30 series can still take advantage of a lot of stuff, and same with 20 series, but we'll get into those a little bit later. Let's go ahead and dig into the big moneymaker that really is the moneymaker, making all these crazy FPS claims on Nvidia's graphs and stuff, and that is the multi-frame generation. And I think in order to explain multi-frame generation, we should just hop into game where frame generation has already been at for DLSS. All right, so we're in Cyberpunk here, native high settings, and the GPU that we have in here is the RTX 4070 Ti Super. So again, if you watched the last video, the 4070 Ti Super is actually probably only gonna be a small bit slower than the 5070 Ti. Just hilarious. This generation is not exactly what Nvidia wants you to think it is. And that is in part because of the multi-frame generation. Now the thing about frame generation, takes the current frame and the next frame that the game is rendering, interpolates, the in-between frame, and then it inserts that fake frame in between the two real ones. Which does sound really cool. Is like you can basically get double the frame rate, and that's what whole RTX 40 series was advertised on, because it supported this new frame generation thing from Nvidia. The problem with it is because you are holding that next frame in the game, you're moving your mouse and that isn't being reflected on the screen, which leads to more latency. So you can see right now we don't have frame generation on, but in the upper left corner of the screen, a little bit of a latency measure there. We're at about 69 nice FPS. We're getting anywhere from about 28 to like 32 milliseconds of PC latency, which isn't bad. This actually feels, I think, quite nice to play. This is also in part because I'm using Nvidia Reflex, which helps reduce the latency for the game. Let's go ahead and actually turn on DLSS frame generation. And we apply that, and for some reason, you didn't have to do this before, but now you have to restart the game to apply DLSS frame gen. So let's go do that really quick. Now we're back, restarted in Cyberpunk, and DLSS frame generation is on. And you can just see the difference here. So we were getting around 30-ish milliseconds of latency before, let the FPS adjust and everything. But now we're getting in the range of like 45 to 50 milliseconds. So our latency has increased like 50% more than what we had before. Obviously the frame rate is higher too. And if I do move the mouse around, now you guys are only seeing 60 FPS on the video here, But at the same time that this actually looks quite good, I think the latency is still manageable here. But the problem with it is if you end up getting too much latency, like what if we try to play at a higher settings in a game or something like that? Like say just ray tracing low and turn off any upscaling here. It's like, oh, because of frame gen, we're actually still getting something pretty decent, but the latency is up at like 80, 90 milliseconds, and it doesn't really feel that smooth. It isn't the, I will say, it's not the worst experience in the world, but I can also see some artifacts just like with things getting duplicated around. It's a little bit weird because frame generation has issues, especially when you're working with lower frame rates, because each of these frames, because there's less of them, there's going to be a larger gap in between them. So it'll lead to more artifacts as the AI that does the DLSS frame gen is just trying to make up the gap. And I think this is why, especially at the lower frame rates and stuff, when you see the demos of these, it's usually in a very slow moving camera, and it's trying to hide a lot of the issues that DLSS frame gen can have, especially at lower frame rates. You can actually see that we were at like 70 FPS before in the same area, but without frame generation, we're actually only at like, we're like 50 FPS. We actually didn't get like double the frame rate or anything like that. And I bet you're wondering, why am I talking about DLSS frame generation problems and all that? That isn't really relevant anymore because this is DLSS 4. In DLSS 4, the multi-frame generation, and I thought this was different at first, that's just an iteration on the 2x frame generation that Nvidia already has provided with DLSS 3. And all of the exact same problems can apply. Basically what Nvidia is doing is just taking that one frame that they have there and then just making 3 extra frames instead, or up to 3. So this could 4x your frame rate. And there's a program that I have that's doing something extremely similar to what Nvidia is doing with DLSS 4 multi-frame generation. And this program is called lossless scaling. And I've talked to the developer of this program, and he gave me a branch. He gave me like a beta branch. So this version isn't even out yet. This is kind of an exclusive little demo here, but he improved this even more. And it was already doing ×2, ×3, ×3, or ×4 frame generation. So this is more actually what Nvidia is doing. I just turned it on the top left corner of the screen. You can see that it does drop our base FPS down. Now we're at about 30 FPS, but then it's frame generating ×4 up to 130 FPS. And surprisingly, doesn't look that bad, and the latency isn't terrible either. This is essentially the same concept that Nvidia is doing here, except they're integrating it into the game, and they're using DLSS AI models instead. This also uses AI. And Nvidia might want to, give you these claims that basically just more frames, but it has downsides, it has disadvantages. Now, the first thing is Digital Foundry actually posted up a video about DLSS 4. They got early hands-on access to it, already pumped this video out. I don't know, they're crazy. They're Digital Foundry, they're nuts. I can see tons of issues with this just watching their video. Like, the frame generation is clearly not perfect in terms of image quality. These are not free frames. The lights that are going by in the background, they look like they're jittering. The lights on the left side, and if I slow it down a lot, there's some weird disocclusion artifacts, and I think these are because of the frame generation. I don't think this is because of upscaling here. It is all over the place. You see these weird jittery things. The little headlight things that are on the car are jittering too, all over the frame. And I think these are frame generation artifacts, because if you actually look at the artifacts that we are seeing here, it's kind of like duplicating the same thing over. And that's something that frame generation is doing. It's trying to duplicate that. So we can clearly see that the image quality is not perfect. So them claiming these insane things like, oh, the 5070 is the same as a 4090. In their eyes, if it's just a frame rate number, then technically speaking, this isn't false advertising, but this is really borderline that. This is very close to false advertising. But when Linus played with his multi-frame generation on, he said he liked it for the most part, but had that similar opinion that,
with that said, I know what I'm looking for. Other reviewers are going to know what they're looking for. If I were to put one of my siblings in front of this, looks pretty good.
Hey, most average people won't notice it. If you are pixel peeping and if you are sensitive to latency, then you're probably going to have issues. I think that segues us into the next big thing about this is, what about the latency? because you're adding even more frames. So is it gonna feel like a slurry mess? Is it only gonna look good but not actually feel good to play the game? And you know, playing a game is actually probably the most important part about a game. I mean, Nvidia might not agree with that.
Impossible without artificial intelligence.
But actually interacting with the game world is kind of the whole point of a goddamn video game. I am at least happy to say there isn't going to be a huge problem with latency. In the Digital Foundry video, they did actually test this, and it's on the left side of the screen. You can see it's just frame generation at ×2, the base frame generation. In the middle, it's ×3, and then on the right, it's ×4. So they actually give you the option to choose how many frames you want to generate in case it's like too much or too little. The other left side, it's like 50 milliseconds average. X3, it's like 55-ish milliseconds average latency. Then on the right side, it's 57 milliseconds average. It doesn't seem like it actually costs that much more latency in order to add more frames in between the two real ones, okay? I don't know if this actually means it'll be more responsive. Like say like you're at 60 FPS and you frame generate X4, then it gets up to like 200 FPS, which I think is a reasonable benchmark there. It's gonna feel still like you're playing at like 60 FPS or maybe even worse than 60 FPS, but it's gonna look like you're playing at like 200. The real question is, this is a feature, and that feature has to be integrated into games. So if it's something that Nvidia is marketing it on, then how many games are actually going to get this, and you're actually going to be able to use a specific multi-frame generation feature in that? And what I can say is it seems like a ton of games are going to have multi-frame gen. Nvidia did announce that 75 games at launch will have DLSS 4, and then maybe that would all include multi-frame generation. I'm not 100% sure on that one. The compatibility is going to be even better than what you might think, and it's because Nvidia's app, and they showed this in the DLSS 4 explanation, if DLSS frame generation is already in the game, and I'm not 100% sure how this is going to actually play out, but it seems like you can force the game to do a higher amount of frame generation, which is wild. You can just tell your driver software is like, hey, I would rather generate 3 frames, not 2. I'd rather generate 4 frames, not 2. It'll just do that because I'm guessing the driver can just hook into the software that's in the game. And that actually ties into the next thing, because DLSS 4 isn't just this multi-frame generation. They improved a lot. They did improve the base frame generation for it. Will be 2 times frame generation in the game. And on the left side, it's 124 FPS on the old model. And on the right side, it's 137 FPS. And it's also using less VRAM. Problem with DLSS frame gen, and if there's even more frames being duplicated, is it going to use even more VRAM? I'm not 100% sure how that works. This card might not be able to do this multi-frame generation that well because it doesn't have enough VRAM. It doesn't have enough AI performance or something like that. And also, if you notice at the presentation, then Nvidia has conveniently left out one card, the RTX 5060. I'm wondering where that card is going to stack into this lineup later on, because the performance might not be there in order to even do this frame generation type stuff. Now they're also improving the upscaling quality, which is very exciting for me because DLSS already looks very, very good in games. Like, I'm always impressed by the way it looks, and they're just gonna make it look even better. Now, Linus actually has tried this for himself. You can see here in the screenshot, new version of DLSS Super Resolution here. It says convolutional neural network. Now, this is the old version. Now, if you were to tick left on this, then it would be the new model of DLSS called a transformer model. Basically what this is it's a completely new AI model for DLSS Super Resolution. And from what I can see, especially in the Digital Foundry video where they actually side by side compared these two, the new one looks quite a bit better. There's less ghosting. You can see on the text here on that little monitor thing. You see with this NPC, I almost thought that the ghosting that's on the left side there was just part of how the game worked. I didn't really know that that's DLSS doing that. So this is a massive improvement in terms of the image quality, especially with ghosting. Now the sharpness can also be improved in certain things. And to me, this doesn't really have any downsides. Now this is going to be available on all RTX GPUs like DLSS already is. You have to have an RTX at least 20 series graphics card in order to use DLSS Super Resolution. Now the only thing that's leaving a little question to me is actually in this screenshot. Why are you able to choose the new one or the old one? Like, they give you a toggle here. I don't know if it'll always look like this in every single game. By the way, I just got a cat. Cat is joining me right now. Why would you want the old version? Could there be performance issues? Is there actual image quality problems with the new one that we haven't seen yet? And then that's why they give you the option? I'm not sure. Is this performance? Is this quality? I don't know why you can still pick between them. The only other thing I can think of is Nvidia's just being chill like that, and they're just providing both options if you want to see them, I guess, just for science sake. Maybe this will be eliminated in more games going forward and they'll just use the transformer version of it. I just wanted to point that out. It may be a nothing burger, I'm not sure. What's actually really cool about the Super Resolution too is it seems like if your game doesn't have the newest version of DLSS in it, you can also use the Nvidia app to force an upgrade to it and then get that better quality DLSS, which is really cool. You can just go in your software and click, 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 and it's just there now. Now let's talk about that latency with frame generation. And something that could actually help with that latency is Nvidia Reflex 2. It's wild to hear that Nvidia apparently did a study in like 2018 or whatever, how latency affects PC games, and people actually play better when you have less latency. Apparently they needed a whole research study to tell them that, oh, games feel more responsive when there's less latency. $1 trillion company. I don't know. But that's besides the point though, because Nvidia has made something really crazy. Well, Nvidia's claiming that you can get even lower latency here. So if you're just playing the game normally, now it's 75% faster if you use both the first Reflex and Reflex 2. It's pretty crazy. And what Nvidia is doing here blows my mind. Frame warp technology, sensing the input from your mouse and then going into the game that you're perceiving and not waiting for your system to render a new frame, but actually taking your current frame and then moving little parts of it to where your mouse is. So the game feels more responsive. It's like you're almost in tune. They even showed things in Valorant that you can get 1 millisecond of PC latency. Just insane. Do we even need more than that? Like, I can't tell at 2 milliseconds or 3 milliseconds. I don't think the other companies are going to catch up to this very quickly because this is quite a wild technology. This is going to kind of cement Nvidia as the go-to esports graphics card brand for everything. And I don't know if this will work with the 50 series, multi-frame generation. I don't even know if it'll be compatible with frame generation because it's already warping the frames. What frames are real at that point? I don't even know at this point. What kind of issues does this have? Space that's left behind them is completely blank. Like, you're just gonna have a hole in the frame. So what Nvidia actually does, and I don't know if this uses AI or not, in paint behind the object that is getting moved, so you don't actually see this weird shit in the screen. So it looks really bad. That's what the game would look like before. And then with the in painting, it looks quite good. And the only problem with this is, would it have any artifacts? Would that look a little bit weird? And you can see in the clip that they actually show from Reflex 2 that there is like some ghosting trails with the gun as it's kind of moving back and forth here. That's the only thing I can see, and I don't think that's because of Reflex 2. I think that's just the TAA, the temporal anti-aliasing that's in the game. I would think that this would put a little bit of GPU overhead on your system, so I think the latency benefits would outweigh that issue. Now, this is only going to be available on RTX 50 series, at least at the start.
Reflex Frame Warp is coming soon for all GeForce RTX gamers and will be available first on RTX 50 series GPUs.
Why? I have no clue why. I think just because of exclusivity and them trying to hype up the new generation. I have no logical reason to know why. But Nvidia did confirm that it's going to be available on all RTX GPUs, just like how DLSS Super Resolution is. Every RTX card is going to be able to use this. Varying degrees of success, maybe the slower cards can't use it as much, and if you don't have much AI performance, I don't even know if this necessarily uses a tensor cores on the GPU. That part wasn't explained. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is that neural textures and stuff. This whole neural rendering in a game, making texture compression and model detail that is much more compressed and really only works on Nvidia GPUs. This is going to build up that walled garden with Nvidia features. Like, some games would just look significantly better on Nvidia GPUs, and they could always hold that over the other brands' heads. But they're also introducing these neural faces, which is weird. They generate the motions of, I'm thinking, what the actors and stuff would want to say. Nvidia did a ton of research and composited a bunch of photos and stuff and trained models. What's really weird to me is it seems like the neural faces aren't actually in-game models. And I think it's pretty obvious when you actually look at them that it seems like it's almost just painted on to the face in the game. It doesn't look like it's actually in the game. And that's because I think Nvidia is literally deep faking the neural faces. And that's the reason when they did all that research and they like did all these shots from different angles and that type of stuff. And maybe with built-in technology in the game, they're always aware of where a face is, so you don't get that weird pop in, pop out. Let me know if I'm wrong on that, but this might be a deep fake and that wouldn't really surprise me. But this claim, we know it's bullshit. Yeah, this is a weird claim, multi-frame generation. It's not going to be the same as real frames in the game. It's actually going to probably feel worse than the base frame generation, like the 2x one that we had before. These aren't the same thing. These aren't the same thing. Don't know what to say. But if it's good, it is good. And I hope people can enjoy it. But I think this is why these GPUs, they're marketed on their AI performance, this multi-frame generation, instead of actually being marketed on their actual raw rendering performance. Because if you break down the specs, if you want to watch that video, it'll be right, actually, I'll put it right here. Yeah, we'll see how this pans out, but I do appreciate a lot of the super resolution improvements and even improving the model for frame gen in general. A lot of good stuff there. That's been it for me. Let me know what you think on this, and I'm gonna see you guys in the next video. Have a good one, and peace.